Rachel Donovan stepped out of her truck into the cold drizzle of a Tacoma evening, the kind where fog rolls off the waterfront and swallows sound whole. The parking lot outside Murphy's Bar stretched empty except for a handful of vehicles clustered near the entrance, their headlights cutting weak beams through the mist. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked toward the door with the steady pace of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to protect. But Rachel carried a secret that would soon turn this quiet night into something no one expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bar sat in Tacoma's industrial waterfront district, wedged between shuttered warehouses and repair shops that had seen better decades. Murphy's had been there for 40 years. A dive bar with wooden booths worn smooth by generations of dock workers, truckers, and the occasional lost traveler looking for a place that didn't ask questions. The neon sign above the door flickered red and blue, casting uneven light across puddles that reflected the sky like broken mirrors. Rachel pushed through the heavy door and felt the warmth hit her face along with the smell of old beer and fried food. The interior was exactly what she expected. Dim lighting, a long bar running the length of the left wall, booths lining the right, and a pool table on the back corner where two men were taking lazy shots. Classic rock played low from speakers that crackled on the high notes. A handful of patrons sat scattered throughout, nursing drinks and keeping to themselves. She made her way to the bar and slid onto a stool near the middle, close enough to see the door but not so close that she looked like she was waiting for someone. The bartender, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled into a ponytail, approached with a practiced smile. "What can I get you?" "Just a beer, whatever's on tap." The bartender nodded and moved down the bar to pour the drink. Rachel let her eyes wander across the room, taking in details without appearing to study anything too closely. It was a habit she developed over years of training and fieldwork, the ability to assess a space in seconds while looking completely relaxed. The two men at the pool table were locals, probably regulars based on how comfortable they seemed. The couple in the corner booth were on a date, leaning close and speaking in low voices. Three men at a table near the back were louder, laughing and drinking shots, their jackets draped over chairs. The bartender returned with Rachel's beer and set it down on a coaster. "Running the tab?" "No, I'll pay as I go." Rachel handed over a $10 bill and told her to keep the change. She sipped her beer slowly, feeling the cold liquid ease the tension in her shoulders. It had been a long drive from Seattle, where she'd spent the morning at a veteran support center, helping other former service members navigate the labyrinth of VA paperwork and benefits claims. Rachel had left the Navy 3 years ago, after 12 years of service, most of it spent in roles she couldn't discuss at dinner parties. She transitioned to civilian life the way many veterans did, with difficulty, purpose, and a determination to find meaning outside the structure of military service. Her current work brought her to places like this often. Tonight, she was supposed to meet a former sailor named Tim Breslin, who'd reached out through the Veterans Network asking for help. He'd been dishonorably discharged under circumstances he claimed were unjust, and he wanted advice on how to appeal the decision. Rachel had agreed to meet him here, neutral territory, where he'd feel comfortable talking. She checked her phone. 7:15. Tim was supposed to arrive at 7. She sent him a quick text asking if he was running late, then set the phone face down on the bar. The three men at the back table had gotten louder. Rachel glanced over and saw them ordering another round of shots, their voices carrying across the room with the careless volume of people who'd already had too much to drink. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head and a leather jacket, caught her looking and held her gaze for a moment too long. Rachel turned back to her beer without reacting. She'd seen men like that before. The kind who thought a woman alone in a bar was an invitation. The kind who mistook politeness for interest and silence for weakness. She hoped they'd stay at their table and leave her alone, but experience had taught her to prepare for the alternative. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tim. "Sorry, can't make it tonight. Something came up. Can we reschedule?" Rachel sighed and typed back a quick response telling him to reach out when he was ready. She finished her beer and signaled the bartender for another one. Since she was already here, she might as well relax for a bit before making the drive back to Seattle. The second beer arrived, and Rachel settled into the quiet rhythm of the bar. The couple in the corner booth left, wrapped up in each other and oblivious to the world. The two men at the pool table finished their game and moved to the bar to order food. The three men at the back table stayed where they were, their laughter growing more aggressive, tinged with something that made Rachel's instincts prickle. She kept her posture relaxed, but her awareness sharp. In her years of service, Rachel had learned that danger rarely announced itself with fanfare. It crept in quietly, disguised as harmless noise until it was too late to avoid. She'd been trained to recognize the signs, the shift in tone, the change in body language, the moment when social drinking turned into something darker. The tall man with the shaved head stood up from his table and walked toward the bar. Rachel didn't look directly at him, but she tracked his movement in her peripheral vision. He stopped a few feet away from her and leaned against the bar, close enough to make his presence known. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying the loose confidence of someone who had just enough to drink to feel invincible. "You here alone?" "Just waiting for someone." "Yeah? They late?" "Something like that." He moved closer, closing the distance between them. "What's your name?" "Not interested in sharing it." Her tone was polite, but firm, the kind of response that should have been clear enough to end the conversation. The man grinned, taking her refusal as a challenge rather than a boundary. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm just being friendly." Rachel set her beer down and turned to face him fully. "I appreciate it, but I'm good. Thanks." For a moment, she thought he might actually walk away, but then his two friends stood up from their table and started walking over, their movements coordinated in a way that made Rachel's pulse quicken slightly. Not with fear, but with the sharp focus that came from recognizing a situation escalating. The second man, stocky, with a thick beard and a flannel shirt, positioned himself on Rachel's other side, while the third, lean, with slicked-back hair and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, stood behind the first. They weren't blocking her in completely, not yet, but they were establishing control of the space around her. "My buddy here is just trying to be nice. No need to be rude." Rachel kept her expression neutral. She'd been in worse situations than this, facing actual threats in combat zones where the stakes were life and death. 3 drunk men in a bar weren't going to intimidate her, but she also knew that underestimating a threat, any threat, was a mistake that could cost you everything. "I'm not being rude," Rachel said evenly. "I'm just not interested in company tonight." The tall man with the shaved head leaned in closer, his breath smelling of whiskey. "What if we don't really care what you're interested in?" And that's when Rachel knew this night was about to go somewhere these men weren't prepared for. What these 3 men didn't know, what nobody in Murphy's bar could have guessed by looking at Rachel Donovan sitting calmly on that bar stool, was that they were threatening someone who had spent the better part of a decade operating in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Rachel wasn't just a veteran. She was former Naval Special Warfare, one of the first women to complete the rigorous training pipeline and serve in direct combat roles alongside Navy SEAL teams. Her service record was classified, buried under layers of security clearances and redacted mission reports. The operations she'd participated in would never make the news, and the awards she'd earned sat in a locked box in her apartment, rarely looked at and never displayed. Rachel had learned early in her transition to civilian life that most people didn't understand what she'd done, and those who did understand often didn't want to hear about it. She joined the Navy at 19, driven by a combination of patriotism, restlessness, and a desire to prove she was capable of more than the small-town life she'd been born into. Basic training had been challenging, but manageable. It was after, when she'd volunteered for special operations training, that Rachel discovered what she was truly made of. The selection process had nearly broken her. Months of physical and mental torture designed to weed out anyone who lacked the absolute commitment required for special warfare roles. Sleep deprivation, constant physical stress, psychological pressure that pushed candidates to their limits and then demanded more. Rachel had watched men twice her size quit, watched people with impressive athletic backgrounds ring the bell and walk away. But she'd stayed. Through every frozen night in the surf, through every impossible exercise, through every moment when her body screamed at her to stop, Rachel had refused to quit. She'd earned her place on a team that operated in the shadows, conducting missions that required precision, intelligence, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions in seconds. Rachel had kicked down doors in hostile territory, provided security for high-value targets, and participated in operations that had directly saved American lives. She'd been shot at, blown up, and pushed to the edge of human endurance more times than she could count. And she'd been good at it. Not just competent, but exceptional. Her commanders had recognized it, her teammates had respected it, and Rachel had found a sense of purpose she'd never experienced anywhere else. The work was brutal and the cost was high, but it mattered in a way that few things in life ever did. But after 12 years, Rachel had made the difficult decision to leave. Not because she couldn't handle it anymore, but because she'd started to see the toll the lifestyle was taking. Friends lost to combat or training accidents, relationships that couldn't survive the long deployments, and the secrets she couldn't share. The gradual erosion of the person she used to be replaced by someone harder and more distant. She'd walked away with her health mostly intact and her conscience mostly clear. The transition had been harder than any mission she'd ever run. Suddenly, she was just another veteran trying to figure out how to exist in a world that moved at a different pace and valued different things. The skills that had made her invaluable in combat, situational awareness, tactical thinking, controlled aggression, those didn't translate easily to civilian jobs. Rachel had drifted for the first year, taking random security work and trying to find something that felt meaningful. It was through a veterans organization that she discovered her new purpose, helping other former service members navigate the challenges of coming home. She'd become a benefits counselor and advocate, using her understanding of military bureaucracy and her personal experience to help veterans get the support they deserved. The work didn't come with the adrenaline rush of special operations, but it came with something else, the knowledge that she was still serving, still making a difference, just in a different way. Rachel had found peace in that, or at least something close to it. But some skills never really fade. The training was too thorough, too deeply embedded in muscle memory and instinct. Rachel could still assess a threat matrix in seconds, could still read body language and tactical positioning with the same clarity she'd had in the field. And right now, every bit of that training was telling her that the situation in Murphy's bar was about to get worse. The three men had positioned themselves in a loose triangle around her, controlling her immediate space without overtly blocking her in. It was a predatory formation, whether they realized it or not, the same kind of positioning a pack uses to isolate prey. The tall one with the shaved head was still trying to play it casual, but his body language had shifted. His weight was forward, his shoulders squared, his hands loose at his sides in a way that suggested he was ready to grab or strike. The bearded one on her left had stopped pretending to be friendly. His expression had hardened, and he kept glancing toward the door as if checking to see if anyone was paying attention. The third man, the lean one with slicked-back hair, was the quietest of the three, but Rachel had marked him as potentially the most dangerous. He wasn't drunk like his friends. His eyes were clear and calculating, and he moved with a deliberate precision that suggested he'd done this before. Rachel had already identified her exits. The front door was 15 feet away, currently unobstructed. The back exit was near the restrooms, about 30 feet in the opposite direction. There were no windows large enough to escape through, and the bar itself created a natural barrier that would be difficult to vault over quickly. If this situation deteriorated, she'd have to go through these men or around them, and neither option was ideal in a confined space with potential bystanders. The bartender had noticed the interaction and was watching with a concerned expression, but she hadn't intervened yet. The other patrons seemed oblivious, or deliberately ignoring what was happening.
the way people often do when they sense trouble but don't want to get involved. Rachel was effectively on her own, at least for the moment. "Look," Rachel said, keeping her voice calm and level, "I don't want any trouble. I'm just here having a drink, and I'd like to be left alone." The tall man laughed, a sound without real humor. "See, that's where you're wrong. You're in our bar, sitting at our spot, and now you're acting like you're too good to talk to us? That's disrespectful." Rachel noted the possessive language, the attempt to establish dominance over the space. These men weren't just drunk and looking for attention. They were establishing a narrative where she was in the wrong, where whatever happened next would be justified as a response to her disrespect. It was a pattern Rachel had seen before, the way predators rationalized their actions, and it told her something important. These men had done this before. This wasn't a spontaneous, drunken mistake. It was a coordinated intimidation, possibly worse, and she'd been selected as their target because she appeared to be alone and vulnerable. What they couldn't see, what they had no way of knowing, was that Rachel Donovan was never truly alone. Even now, as she sat on that bar stool weighing her options, she knew exactly who to call if the situation escalated beyond her ability to handle it peacefully. Because while Rachel left active service 3 years ago, she'd maintained close relationships with the people she'd served alongside. And 6 of those people, all current members of SEAL Team 3, were less than 20 minutes away finishing a training exercise at Joint Base Lewis and McChord. Rachel had already sent a subtle text before these men approached, a simple check-in message to her old team leader that included her location. It was habit, the kind of precaution you took when you'd spent years operating in uncertain situations. She hadn't been expecting trouble, but she'd been prepared for it. Now, as the situation continued to deteriorate, Rachel made a decision. She'd give these men one more chance to walk away. If they didn't take it, she'd end this confrontation quickly and decisively. And if they were stupid enough to actually try something, well, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions.
The tall man with the shaved head reached out and placed his hand on Rachel's shoulder, his grip firm enough to make his intentions clear. "Why don't you come sit with us? We'll buy you a drink, and you can stop being so unfriendly." Rachel looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. Her expression remained perfectly calm, almost bored. "Remove your hand." He squeezed slightly instead, his grin widening. "Or what?" The bearded man laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the bar. "She thinks she's tough. Look at her, trying to act hard." Rachel had encountered this type of arrogance before, the kind that came from men who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. They saw a woman alone, average height, average build, nothing about her physical appearance that suggested she was anything other than an easy target. They had no frame of reference for what she actually was. In their minds, this was already over. They'd intimidated her, established dominance, and now she'd either comply with whatever they wanted or they'd escalate until she did. It was a script they'd probably followed before, with other women who'd been too scared or too smart to fight back. They expected fear, pleading, or maybe angry resistance that they could easily overpower. What they didn't expect was complete indifference. "Last chance," Rachel said quietly. "Walk away." The tall man's expression darkened. His fingers dug into her shoulder hard enough to hurt, and he leaned in close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. "You don't give me orders, sweetheart. I think you need to learn some manners." The lean man with the slicked-back hair moved closer, his hand reaching toward Rachel's other arm. "Come on, don't make this difficult. Just come have a drink with us and we'll all get along fine." Rachel's tactical assessment crystallized in that moment. 3 men, all larger than her, all positioned to control her movement. The tall one had a hand on her shoulder. The lean one was reaching for her arm. The bearded one was blocking her path to the front door. They'd committed to the confrontation now.
crossed the line from intimidation to assault. The bartender had her phone out, probably calling the police, but Rachel knew from experience that help wouldn't arrive in time to prevent whatever these men had planned. The other patrons had cleared out, sensing the violence brewing and wanting no part of it. Murphy's bar had gone quiet, except for the music still playing from the crackling speakers. Rachel could feel the familiar calm settling over her, the same mental state she'd entered countless times in combat situations. Time seemed to slow slightly. Her awareness sharpened. Every detail became crisp and clear. The position of each man's feet, the angle of their bodies, the exits and obstacles in the room, the potential weapons within reach. She'd been trained for scenarios exactly like this: close quarters combat against multiple opponents, how to use leverage and technique to overcome size and strength advantages, how to identify targets and eliminate threats in order of priority. The training had been brutal and comprehensive, and it had been reinforced through real-world application in situations far more dangerous than a bar fight. But Rachel didn't want to fight these men, not because she was afraid of losing, but because she was afraid of winning. She knew what she was capable of, knew that if she engaged with full force, she could seriously injure or even kill these men within seconds. And despite their behavior, despite their threats, they were still just drunk idiots making terrible decisions. They didn't deserve to die for their stupidity.
So Rachel made one final attempt at de-escalation. She looked directly at the tall man and spoke in a voice that carried absolute certainty. "I'm a combat veteran. I've been trained in hand-to-hand combat by some of the most elite fighters in the military. If you don't remove your hand and walk away right now, I will hurt you, all of you, and then you'll be arrested for assault. This is your last opportunity to make a smart choice." For a moment, genuine uncertainty flickered across the tall man's face. Her tone, her body language, the complete absence of fear in her eyes, it all suggested she wasn't bluffing. But then his friends laughed, and male pride overrode common sense. "Oh, we got a tough girl here," the bearded man said mockingly. "Military training? Sure you are, sweetheart, and I'm a Green Beret." The lean man smirked. "She probably did some paperwork on a base somewhere and thinks that makes her a soldier." The tall man's grip tightened further on Rachel's shoulder, his other hand moving toward her arm. "I'm tired of talking. You're coming with us, and if you're smart, you won't make a scene." That was the moment when the fourth man appeared from the direction of the restrooms. Rachel had been tracking him in her peripheral awareness since he'd entered the bar about 10 minutes ago. A large man with a thick neck and cold eyes who'd gone straight to the back without ordering anything. Now, he approached their group with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been waiting for his cue. "Having trouble here?" the fourth man asked, though his tone made it clear he wasn't offering to help Rachel. He positioned himself behind her, completing the box formation that trapped her between all four men. The tall man grinned. "No trouble, just making a new friend." Rachel's assessment shifted immediately. This wasn't a spontaneous confrontation by drunk bar patrons. This was coordinated. The fourth man had been positioned in advance, waiting. They'd done this before, probably many times, selecting isolated women and using numbers and intimidation to force compliance, which meant they were predators, not just idiots making bad choices, but people who'd systematically planned to hurt someone tonight. And that changed everything. The fourth man, easily 6'4" and heavily muscled, reached toward Rachel's hair. "Pretty thing like you shouldn't be drinking alone. Dangerous things can happen." Rachel's hand moved to her jacket pocket, a casual gesture that the men probably interpreted as nervousness, but what she actually did was activate a specific app on her phone, one that sent an immediate emergency signal to 6 specific contacts. No text, no call, just a GPS location and a priority alert that meant one thing: I need help now. The signal went out in less than a second, and 23 miles away at Joint Base Lewis McChord, 6 Navy SEALs who'd just finished a training exercise and were heading to their vehicles for the drive home felt their phones vibrate with an alert pattern they'd all agreed to honor without question. Lieutenant Commander Nolan Hawk Brennan looked at his screen and saw Rachel's name attached to an emergency GPS marker. He didn't hesitate. didn't question, didn't pause to consider whether it might be a false alarm. He'd served with Rachel Donovan in 3 different combat zones. He'd trusted her with his life more times than he could count. If she was sending an emergency signal, it was real. "Mount up," he barked to the 5 other SEALs walking toward the parking lot. "Rachel's in trouble. Tacoma waterfront, we move now." Back at Murphy's bar, Rachel looked at the 4 men surrounding her and spoke in a voice that carried no fear, no anger, just simple fact. "You're making a mistake." The tall man laughed. "The only mistake was you thinking you had a choice." Rachel's smile was cold and quipped. "I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to whoever's going to have to explain to you what happened here tonight." The 4 men exchanged glances, their confidence momentarily shaken by Rachel's complete lack of fear. But mob mentality and alcohol had already pushed them past the point of rational thinking. The tall man with the shaved head tightened his grip on Rachel's shoulder until his knuckles went white. "You've got a smart mouth," he growled. "Maybe we need to teach you when to keep it shut." The 4th man, the large one who'd emerged from the back, moved closer until Rachel could smell his cologne mixed with sweat. "Trent's right. You need an attitude adjustment." So the tall one was named Trent. Rachel filed the information away automatically, along with every other detail she was collecting. The bearded one kept checking the door nervously, suggesting he was the weakest link psychologically. The lean one with slicked back hair had moved his hand to his belt, where Rachel could see the outline of a knife sheath. The 4th man carried himself with the false confidence of someone who'd relied on size and intimidation his entire life without ever facing a real challenge. They were dangerous because they were coordinated and predatory, but they weren't trained, they weren't disciplined, and they had absolutely no idea what they were dealing with. "Last warning," Rachel said, her voice dropping to a tone she'd used in combat situations when giving orders that she expected to be followed without question. "Walk away now, and this ends here. Keep going, and you're going to regret every decision that brought you to this moment." Trent's response was to grab her other shoulder with his free hand and pull her off the bar stool. Rachel allowed it, staying loose and balanced as he yanked her to her feet. Better to be standing than sitting if this went where she knew it was going. The other 3 men closed in tighter, forming a wall between her and any potential escape routes. The bartender's voice cut through the tension. "I've called the police. They're on their way. You men need to leave now." The bearded man glanced toward her nervously, but Trent just laughed. "Police response time in this neighborhood? We've got at least 15 minutes. Plenty of time." Plenty of time for what? Rachel didn't need to ask. She'd seen enough in her years of service to know exactly what these men had planned. They'd used this bar before, probably had a vehicle waiting outside, maybe a second location already selected. This was practiced, routine for them. They'd done this to other women and gotten away with it. That ended tonight. The 4th man reached for Rachel's arm, his massive hand closing around her bicep with crushing force. "Let's take this outside and continue our conversations somewhere more private." Rachel's mind was already 3 moves ahead, calculating angles and force vectors, identifying which man to neutralize first and in what order. But she also knew that her backup was en route. The SEAL team would have received her emergency signal minutes ago. They'd be moving at maximum speed, probably violating every traffic law between the base and Tacoma. She needed to buy time, keep the situation from escalating to the point where she had no choice but to engage. "You really don't want to do this," Rachel said, directing her words at the bearded man who seemed the most uncertain. "Whatever you think is going to happen here, you're wrong. Help is already coming, and when it arrives, your lives are going to change in ways you can't imagine." The bearded man hesitated, his eyes darting between his friends and Rachel. "Maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Garrett," Trent snapped. "She's bluffing. Nobody's coming to help her. She's alone, and she's ours." The lean man with slick back hair moved behind Rachel, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck. "Stop wasting our time. Dominic, bring the van around front." The 4th man, apparently named Dominic, nodded and started toward the door. That confirmed Rachel's worst suspicions. They had a vehicle ready. This wasn't just assault. It was attempted kidnapping. These men were planning to take her somewhere isolated, somewhere they could do whatever they wanted without witnesses.
Rachel's tactical calculation shifted immediately. She couldn't let them get her into that van. Once she was in an enclosed vehicle with 4 attackers, even her training would be tested to its limits. She needed to act now, before Dominic reached the door, before they could coordinate their next move. But she also needed to time it right. Her SEAL team backup was still minutes away. If she engaged now, she'd be fighting alone. If she waited too long, she'd be in the van. The window of optimal action was narrow and closing fast. Trent started pulling her toward the door, his grip bruising her shoulders. The lean man, the one called Dominic based on Trent's earlier comment, actually the one behind her must be someone else, pushed from behind. Garrett, the bearded man, moved to block any escape route to the back of the bar. Rachel let them move her a few feet, appearing to comply, appearing defeated. It was another skill from her training, making your opponent believe they're winning right up until the moment you prove otherwise. She kept her body loose, her expression resigned, her resistance minimal. Let them think she'd given up. Dominic reached the front door and pushed it open, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of rain hitting pavement. The van was probably just outside, engine running, ready for a quick departure. Rachel could see the scenario playing out. They'd drag her outside, force her into the vehicle, and be gone before anyone could react. Except that wasn't going to happen. Rachel's hand moved to her other jacket pocket, pulling out her phone with a gesture that looked like surrender. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking slightly, as if she were finally breaking. "Okay, just don't hurt me. Let me just text my friend that I'm leaving so she doesn't worry." Trent laughed, a cruel sound. "Sure, sweetheart. Tell her you met some nice guys and you're going to party with us. Make it convincing." Rachel's fingers moved across her phone screen, but she wasn't texting a friend. She was activating the audio and video recording function, documenting everything that was happening. Evidence that would be stored in the cloud regardless of what happened to her phone. More importantly, she was checking the response status from her emergency signal. 6 responses had come in, all within the last 3 minutes. The messages were brief, military efficient, en route, ATA 8 minutes, coming hot, hold position, almost there, 2 minutes out. 2 minutes. Rachel just needed to delay for 2 more minutes and this situation would change dramatically. She could do that. She'd held positions under enemy fire for much longer than 2 minutes. She pretended to type slowly, buying seconds. "My friend's name is Jessica. What should I tell her?" The lean man behind her grabbed her phone and looked at the screen. Rachel had been smart enough to have a fake text conversation open, nothing that would reveal her real situation. He sneered and handed the phone back. "Tell her you're fine and you'll see her tomorrow." Rachel typed the message, her fingers deliberately clumsy, dropping the phone once and apologizing as she picked it up. Every second counted now. She could hear Dominic outside, presumably checking on the van. Garrett was still nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Trent was getting impatient, his grip tightening. The lean man kept looking toward the door, eager to get moving. "Done," Rachel said finally, holding up the phone to show the sent message. Trent snatched the phone from her hand and threw it hard against the wall where it shattered into pieces. "Don't need you calling anyone once we're gone." That was fine. The recording had already uploaded, the emergency signal had already been received, and Rachel's backup was now less than 90 seconds away, though these 4 men had no idea what was about to hit them. They dragged Rachel toward the door, their confidence absolute in the way that comes from repeatedly getting away with terrible things. Trent kept one hand locked on her upper arm, while the lean man, whose name Rachel still hadn't caught, gripped her other side. Garrett followed behind, constantly checking over his shoulder despite the bar being nearly empty now. Everyone else had cleared out the moment things turned ugly, a predictable human response to obvious danger. Dominic held the door open, rain spattering against his jacket as cold air rushed into the bar. Beyond him, Rachel could see a dark panel van idling at the curb, exactly as she'd predicted. No plates visible from this angle, windows tinted dark. The kind of vehicle that had been deliberately chosen for exactly this purpose. "Almost there, sweetheart," Trent said, his voice carrying false reassurance that made Rachel's skin crawl. "Just a short ride and we'll have some real privacy to get to know each other." The bartender's voice called out one last time, shaking but determined. "I've got you on camera, all of you. The police will know exactly who you are." Dominic laughed, a sound without warmth. "Camera's been broken for 3 weeks, lady. We checked before we even came in tonight. You've got nothing." That casual admission confirmed everything Rachel needed to know about how organized these men were. They'd scouted the location, identified the broken security camera, chosen their timing carefully. This wasn't opportunistic crime. It was predatory planning executed by men who'd learned to exploit every weakness in their hunting ground. Rachel's feet hit the threshold of the doorway, cold rain hitting her face. She could see the van more clearly now, could see movement inside, suggesting a fifth person behind the wheel. The situation was deteriorating faster than she'd hoped. 5 attackers instead of 4 changed the tactical mathematics significantly. But Rachel also heard something the others didn't, something her trained ears picked up beneath the sound of rain and the rumble of the van's engine. The distinctive roar of high-performance vehicles moving at speeds well above legal limits, still blocks away, but closing fast. Her backup had made incredible time, probably cutting through every red light and stop sign between the base and here. 30 seconds, maybe 45 at most. She just needed to delay a little longer. Rachel let her legs buckle slightly, forcing the men to support more of her weight. "Please," she said, injecting real fear into her voice now, "please just let me go. I won't tell anyone. I'll just leave and forget this happened." It was a performance designed to make them feel they'd won, to slow their movement just enough to keep them from getting her into that van before her team arrived. Trent bought it completely, his grip loosening slightly as he mistook her tactical delay for genuine surrender. "See, that wasn't so hard," Trent said, his tone patronizing. "If you'd just been reasonable from the start, none of this would have been necessary." The sociopath's logic, Rachel thought distantly, blame the victim for their own victimization, make the violence seem like a natural consequence of not complying. It was a mindset she'd encountered in some of the worst people she'd met in her years of service, the kind of thinking that justified atrocities by framing them as inevitable. They were 3 steps from the van now. Dominic moved ahead to open the sliding door, revealing the dark interior. No seats in back, just empty cargo space covered with plastic tarps. Rachel's stomach tightened as she saw the duct tape and zip ties visible on one of the tarps. They'd done this before, multiple times, and they'd prepared thoroughly. "Get her inside," the lean man said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "We've wasted enough time." Trent started pulling Rachel toward the open door. She went limp, making herself dead weight, buying seconds. Garrett grabbed her legs, and together they started lifting her toward the van's interior. Rachel's training screamed at her to act, to disable these threats before they could secure her in the enclosed space where her options would shrink to almost nothing.
But she held on, counting seconds in her head, listening to the growing sound of approaching vehicles. The roar was getting louder now, close enough that even the attackers were starting to notice something unusual. "What the hell is that?" Garrett asked, looking up from Rachel's legs toward the street. "Shut up and get her in the van," Trent snapped. But he was looking around now too, uncertainty creeping into his expression. The sound resolved into multiple vehicles moving in formation, the kind of coordinated approach that spoke to train drivers with a specific tactical objective. Rachel saw the first set of headlights round the corner 2 blocks away, moving fast, followed immediately by 2 more vehicles in a tight formation. Trent's eyes widened as he registered what he was seeing. "Cops?" "No," Rachel said, her voice shifting from fearful to absolutely calm, the tone of someone who knows exactly what's about to happen. "Much worse for you." The vehicles were close enough now to identify 3 modified SUVs, the kind used by special operations teams, painted matte black and moving with the precision that came from drivers who'd done high-speed tactical insertions hundreds of times. They weren't using lights or sirens, but their speed and formation communicated threat more effectively than any warning could have. Dominic dropped Rachel's arm and stepped back from the van. "Trent, we need to go. Now." But Trent was frozen, staring at the approaching vehicles with the dawning realization that something had gone very wrong with their carefully planned abduction. The lean gun released Rachel's other arm and started backing toward the van's driver's side door, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Who the hell did you call?" Trent demanded, turning back to Rachel with anger and growing fear in his eyes. Rachel stood up straight, no longer playing the victim, her posture shifting to something these men finally recognized as dangerous. "I told you, I'm a combat veteran. Did you really think I'd go anywhere without backup?"
The first SUV screeched to a halt 15 feet from the van, blocking any escape route down the street. The second and third vehicles boxed in the other directions with tactical precision, creating a perimeter that left the 4 men in their van with nowhere to go. Doors opened simultaneously and 6 figures emerged in coordinated movement. Even in civilian clothes, there was no mistaking what these men were. They moved with the efficient lethality of apex predators, each one scanning sectors and controlling angles with unconscious precision. Their builds ranged from lean and quick to heavily muscled, but all of them carried themselves with the absolute confidence of people who were among the most highly trained warriors on Earth. Lieutenant Commander Nolan Brennan stepped forward from the lead vehicle, his eyes scanning the scene and immediately understanding the situation. He was in his mid-30s, average height but powerfully built, with the kind of face that looked calm right up until the moment action was required. He'd been Rachel's team leader during her last deployment, and they'd developed the kind of trust that only came from surviving multiple combat situations together. "Rachel?" he called out, his voice carrying command authority. "You good?" "I'm good, Hawk," Rachel replied, using his call sign. But these 4 gentlemen were just about to make a serious mistake. Trent looked between Rachel and the 6 SEALs now surrounding them, his face going pale as understanding finally dawned. "Oh God, oh Jesus Christ! Wrong person to pray to," Rachel said coldly. "You should have listened when I told you to walk away."
The rain continued falling, but the sound seemed distant now, overshadowed by the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a lightning strike. The 6 Navy SEALs had positioned themselves with practiced efficiency, creating overlapping fields of coverage that left the 4 attackers with no avenue of escape. Each SEAL maintained a tactical stance that spoke to thousands of hours of training, their hands loose but ready, their eyes constantly scanning for additional threats. Chief Petty Officer Zane Fletcher, call sign Ironside, moved to Rachel's left side, his massive frame blocking any potential attack vector from that direction. He was built like a tank, 6'3" and heavily muscled, with a square jaw and eyes that had seen action in every major conflict zone of the past decade. Despite his intimidating appearance, his voice was gentle when he addressed Rachel. "You hurt?" Rachel shook her head. "Bruised shoulder, nothing serious. They didn't get far enough to do real damage." "They got far enough," Petty Officer First Class Isaiah Garrett, call sign Smoke, said from behind her. He was lean and quick, the team's expert in close-quarters combat and extraction operations. His eyes were locked on Trent with the kind of focused intensity that made grown men uncomfortable. More than far enough. Senior Chief Dalton Rivers, call sign Compass, circled around the van's perimeter, checking inside and documenting everything with his phone. He was the team's intelligence specialist, methodical and thorough, the one who made sure operations were executed with precision. When he emerged from looking in the van's interior, his expression was grim. Zip ties, duct tape, plastic tarps. This wasn't their first rodeo. Multiple sets of restraints suggest they've done this before, probably multiple times. Specialist Jenna Quinn, call sign Raptor, was the only other woman in the SEAL team, a fact that made her presence even more significant in this moment. She'd fought tooth and nail for her position, proving herself in every way that mattered, and she had zero tolerance for men who preyed on women. She moved to stand directly in front of Trent, her 5'7" frame radiating more threat than men twice her size. "You like picking on women you think can't fight back?" Jenna asked, her voice deceptively calm. "How's it feel now that the numbers aren't in your favor?" Trent's earlier confidence had completely evaporated. He stood with his hands partially raised, his eyes darting between the SEALs surrounding him, looking for any escape route that didn't exist. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding. We were just talking to her, having some drinks. She's overreacting." "Shut your mouth," Petty Officer Second Class Finn Sullivan said flatly. He was positioned near the van's driver's side door, preventing the 5th man still inside from attempting to flee. Finn was the team's communications specialist, usually the calmest voice in any crisis, but right now, his tone carried the kind of cold anger that came from seeing something that violated his core values. Hawk stepped closer to the group, his command presence filling the space. He looked at Rachel, his eyes asking a question that didn't need words. She nodded once, confirming what he'd already assessed from the scene. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an overreaction. This was attempted kidnapping by men who'd done it before and would do it again if they weren't stopped. Rachel Donovan is a decorated combat veteran. She served with distinction in naval special warfare for 12 years. During that time, she participated in operations that saved American lives in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She's earned medals for valor that she can't display because the missions are still classified. He paused, letting that information sink in, watching the attackers' faces as they realized how badly they'd miscalculated. More importantly, Hawk continued, she's one of us, part of our team, our sister in arms, and you four made the catastrophically stupid decision to put your hands on her. Garrett, the bearded one who'd been nervous from the start, was shaking now. We didn't know. We thought she was just some random woman. We didn't know she was military. That's your defense? Jenna asked, incredulously. That you only assault women you think are defenseless? That somehow makes this better? The lean man with slicked back hair, who Rachel still hadn't heard named, tried a different approach. Look, nothing actually happened. She's fine. No harm, no foul. We can all just walk away from this. Zane laughed, a sound without humor. Walk away? You planned to kidnap her. You had restraints ready. You coordinated this attack. And you think you're just gonna walk away? Dominic, the large fourth man who'd been so confident earlier, finally found his voice. Who the hell are you people? You can't just block us in and threaten us. We'll call the cops ourselves. Please do, Dalton said, holding up his phone where evidence of the van's interior was clearly visible. I'm sure the Tacoma PD would be very interested in explaining why you have a kidnapping kit in your vehicle. I bet once they start investigating, they'll find DNA evidence from previous victims. That hit home. All four men went very still, and Rachel knew Dalton's educated guess had been correct. These men had done this before, and they'd left evidence. The plastic tarps in the van probably told stories that would turn stomachs once forensic teams analyzed them. Here's what's going to happen, Hawk said, his tone shifting to pure command authority. You're going to stand exactly where you are until the police arrive. The bartender already called them, and I just sent them a message with our location and a brief situation report. When they get here, you're going to cooperate fully. You're going to confess to attempted kidnapping, and you're going to provide information about any other victims you've targeted. And if we don't? Trent asked, trying to reclaim some fragment of his earlier bravado. Isaiah stepped forward, his movement so fluid and controlled that it was more frightening than any aggressive gesture could have been. Then we'll be very disappointed. And trust me when I tell you, you don't want to disappoint us. Finn added from his position near the van. We know who you are now. We've got your faces, your vehicle information, your methods. If you don't cooperate with law enforcement, if you somehow manage to walk away from this, we'll make it our personal mission to ensure you never hurt anyone again. And we're very good at accomplishing our missions. Rachel watched the four men processing their situation, seeing the moment when reality fully crashed down on them. They'd gone from hunters to hunted in the space of minutes, from confident predators to trapped prey. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the earlier scene seemed like a different reality. The sound of sirens finally reached them, growing louder as police units responded to the scene. Hawk pulled out his military identification, ready to explain the situation to local law enforcement. Jenna stayed close to Rachel, a silent show of solidarity that meant more than words could express. Rachel, Hawk said quietly, you want to press charges? Rachel looked at the four men who thought she was helpless, who planned to do terrible things to her, who probably did terrible things to other women who hadn't been as prepared as she was. Absolutely, she said, and I want a full investigation into their previous activities. Those tarps in the van didn't get that way from one night's work. The first police cruiser arrived within 2 minutes, its lights painting the wet street in alternating red and blue. 2 officers emerged cautiously, hands near their weapons, as they assessed a scene that clearly wasn't a standard bar fight. 6 imposing figures surrounding 4 men and a van, all in a standoff formation that spoke to military precision rather than civilian confrontation. Hawk stepped forward immediately, holding his military identification at eye level. Lieutenant Commander Nolan Brennan, SEAL Team 3, Joint Base Lewis McCord. were off duty but responded to an emergency signal from a team member who was being assaulted. The lead officer, a veteran cop in his 40s with sergeant stripes, studied the ID carefully before looking at the scene with new understanding. Sergeant Mike Torres, Tacoma PD. What exactly happened here? Rachel moved forward, her posture straight and professional despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Rachel Donovan, former Naval Special Warfare. I was having a drink at Murphy's bar when these 4 men coordinated an assault and attempted kidnapping. They physically restrained me and were forcing me into that van when my team arrived. Torres's expression hardened as he looked toward the van, then back at the 4 men, who were now clearly trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. Anyone injured? Minor bruisings on my shoulders where they grabbed me, nothing requiring medical attention, but I want to press full charges for assault and attempted kidnapping. A second police vehicle arrived, followed quickly by a third. More officers emerged, and Torres began directing them to secure the scene and separate the suspects for individual questioning. One officer approached the driver's van, who'd remained frozen behind the wheel throughout the entire confrontation. "Out of the vehicle," the officer commanded. "Hands where I can see them." The driver, a thin man in his 30s with greasy hair and a face that suggested he'd made many bad decisions in his life, complied slowly. He kept glancing at Trent as if looking for guidance on what to say, but Trent was staring at the ground, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Dalton approached Sergeant Torres with his phone. "Sir, I documented the interior of the van before your arrival. With your permission, I'd like to show you what we found." Torres looked at the images, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through photos of zip ties, duct tape, plastic tarps, and what appeared to be a bag containing additional restraint equipment. Jesus Christ! How long have these guys been operating? "That's what we'd like to know," Hawk said. "The coordination, the preparation, the scouting of the location, this wasn't their first time. I'd recommend getting your forensics team on that van immediately. I'm betting you'll find evidence connecting them to other cases." Torres nodded grimly and spoke into his radio, requesting a forensics unit and additional detectives. Within minutes, the scene had transformed from a confrontation into a full criminal investigation. Crime scene tape went up around the van, officers were taking statements from each of the suspects separately, and a detective had arrived to begin coordinating the evidence collection. Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s, approached Rachel with a recording device and notepad. "Ms. Donovan, I need to get your full statement. Start from the beginning and tell me everything that happened." Rachel walked Detective Chen through the entire evening, from arriving at Murphy's to meet a veteran she was counseling, to the escalating confrontation with the 4 men, to the moment they attempted to force her into the van. She spoke clearly and precisely, using the kind of detailed observational language that came from years of writing after-action reports in combat zones. "You mentioned sending an emergency signal," she said. "Can you explain that system?" Rachel glanced at Hawk, who nodded permission to share. "When I left active service, my team and I established a protocol. We all have an app on our phones that can send an emergency GPS signal to the others. No message needed, just location and priority alert. If any of us activates it, the others respond without question." "And they were at the base when you sent it?" "Joint Base Lewis McCord, approximately 23 miles away. They made it here in under 8 minutes. Chen's eyebrows rose. "That's extremely fast response time." Zane, overhearing the conversation, spoke up. "When one of ours calls for help, we don't waste time asking questions. We just move." The detective continued her questioning, asking about the specific threats made, the physical contact, the statements about taking Rachel somewhere private. Rachel answered each question thoroughly, painting a clear picture of a coordinated attempted kidnapping by men who'd clearly done this before. Meanwhile, other officers were questioning the 4 attackers separately. Even from a distance, Rachel could see the stories starting to diverge. Garrett was talking rapidly, clearly trying to distance himself from the others. Dominic had gone silent, his massive frame hunched as he stared at the ground. The lean man with slicked-back hair was arguing with his interviewing officer, apparently trying to claim they'd done nothing wrong. And Trent was alternating between angry defiance and visible fear as the reality of his situation sank in. The forensics van arrived, and technicians began their careful documentation of the kidnapping vehicle.
One tech emerged after just a few minutes, calling Detective Chen over urgently. Rachel couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Chen's expression darken significantly as she looked at whatever the technician was showing her on a tablet. Chen returned to Rachel, her voice carefully controlled. Miss Donovan, initial analysis of the van's interior is showing biological evidence from multiple individuals. We're going to need to run full forensics, but preliminary assessment suggests these men have used this vehicle in previous attacks. Rachel felt a cold anger settle in her chest. How many previous victims are we talking about? Too early to say definitively, but we're finding hair samples, skin cells, and what appears to be blood in multiple locations. This van has been used as a crime scene before, possibly multiple times. Jenna, who'd been standing nearby, stepped closer. So Rachel wasn't their first target? She was just the first one who fought back? Appears that way, Chen confirmed, which means you likely prevented them from continuing a pattern of violence that's been going on for some time. Hawk gathered his team together near one of the SUVs, speaking in low tones. Rachel joined them, and he briefed them quickly on what the detective had shared. The 6 SEALs listened with expressions that ranged from cold anger to grim satisfaction that they'd arrived in time. "We got lucky tonight," Isaiah said quietly. "If Rachel hadn't sent that signal when she did—" "But she did," Finn interrupted. "That's the system working exactly as designed. Someone needs help, we respond. No questions asked." "It's more than that," Dalton added. "Rachel trusted us enough to activate the signal. She knew we'd come, and she held her position until we arrived. That's trust built over years of working together." Rachel felt emotion threaten to overwhelm her composure. These 6 people had dropped everything to respond to her emergency. They'd violated traffic laws, probably endangered themselves with high-speed driving, and arrived ready to face whatever threat she was confronting. They'd done it without hesitation because that's what their team did for each other. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough with feeling. "All of you. I know you had plans tonight, and you just—" "Stop," Hawk said firmly but kindly. "You don't thank family for showing up when you need them. That's just what family does." The other 5 nodded agreement, and Rachel felt the tight knot of tension in her chest finally begin to ease. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. Even after leaving active service, even in civilian life, she still had her team. And tonight, that had made all the difference.
As the forensics team continued their methodical documentation of the van, Detective Chen called Rachel and the SEAL team over for a more detailed discussion. She'd been coordinating with other detectives and had information that changed the scope of the investigation significantly. "We ran the van's plates," Chen explained, her tablet displaying registration information. "It's registered to Trent Hollis, the tall one who was leading the assault. But here's where it gets interesting. We've had 3 separate reports over the past 6 months of women being followed or harassed in this exact area of the waterfront district. All 3 descriptions match these men." Hawk crossed his arms, his expression hardening. 3 reports. How many didn't report? "That's the question that keeps me up at night," Chand admitted. "Most assault victims never come forward. For every report we get, statistics suggest there are 5 to 10 more incidents that go unreported. These men have probably been operating much longer than 6 months. Zane spoke up, his deep voice carrying controlled anger. "The bartender said their security camera has been broken for 3 weeks. How convenient. I'm guessing these guys knew about that before they chose this location tonight." "We're pulling surveillance from neighboring businesses," Chen confirmed. "But you're right. The broken camera at Murphy's was almost certainly scouted in advance. These aren't impulsive criminals. They're organized predators who've been refining their methods." A uniformed officer approached with an evidence bag containing a phone. "Detective, we found this in the van's glove compartment. It's password protected, but the owner is claiming it's his personal property and we can't search it without a warrant." Chen smiled grimly. "Tell him we'll have that warrant within the hour. And tell him that if there's anything on that phone he wants to explain before we find it ourselves, now would be the time to cooperate." Rachel watched as the officer returned to speak with Trent, who was now handcuffed and sitting in the back of a police car. Even from a distance, she could see his face go pale as he understood that his phone was about to reveal everything he'd tried to hide. "Miss Donovan," Chen said, turning back to Rachel, "I need to ask you something off the record.
Your combat training. Would you have been able to defend yourself if your team hadn't arrived? Rachel considered the question carefully. Against 4 men who were coordinated and prepared, I could have fought back, possibly escaped, but the outcome would have been uncertain, and people likely would have been seriously injured. Having my team here meant the situation was resolved without anyone getting hurt. Except psychologically, Jenna added. Those 4 are going to remember tonight every time they think about assaulting someone. They're going to remember that they don't always have the advantage they think they do. Isaiah was examining the van from a distance, his tactical mind clearly processing details. Detective, you said there were 3 reports over 6 months. What were the outcomes of those investigations? Chen's expression tightened. 1 victim declined to pursue charges after initially reporting. The other 2 cases remained open but stalled due to lack of evidence. The victims could identify the men, but there was no physical evidence of assault, and the suspects all provided alibis for each other. Classic pack hunting behavior, Dalton observed. They cover for each other, present a united front, make it impossible to break their stories. It only works until someone with the right training and backup calls them on it. A commotion near one of the patrol cars drew everyone's attention. Garrett, the bearded man who had been nervous from the start, was talking rapidly to his interviewing officer, his voice rising with desperation. The officer called Detective Chen over, and after a brief conversation, she returned with significant news. Mr. Garrett has decided to cooperate, Chen announced. He's willing to provide information about previous incidents in exchange for consideration during sentencing. According to his preliminary statement, there have been at least 7 other women they targeted over the past year. Rachel felt her stomach drop. 7 women. 7 women who had experienced the same terror she'd felt tonight, but without a team of Navy SEALs to intervene. 7 women who probably blamed themselves, who maybe stopped going out alone, who'd carried that trauma forward without justice.
Are we able to identify these victims? Hawk asked, his command voice fully engaged now. That's what we're working on, Chen replied. Garrett claims he doesn't know names, but he's providing descriptions, approximate dates, and locations. We're going to cross-reference with missing persons reports, unsolved assault cases, and hospital admissions for the time periods he's describing. Finn pulled out his own phone, typing rapidly. I'm documenting everything we observed tonight. Timestamps, statements, tactical positions, all of it. If this goes to trial, you'll have a complete record from multiple trained observers. Appreciate that, Chen said. Military witness testimony carries significant weight, especially from special operations personnel. The fact that 6 Navy SEALs responded to an emergency and found this scene exactly as Miss Donovan described it will be difficult for any defense attorney to challenge. The lean man with slicked-back hair, whose name Rachel had learned was Levi Crane, was now arguing loudly with his interviewing officer, apparently still trying to claim innocence despite the mounting evidence. His attorney had arrived, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who was clearly trying to do damage control on an impossible case. Dominic had gone completely silent, sitting in his patrol car with his head down, perhaps finally understanding the full weight of what he'd participated in. The van's driver, identified as Marcus Bowen, was crying and claiming he'd just been hired to drive and didn't know what the others were planning. His story was already falling apart under basic questioning. Sergeant Torres approached the group, wiping rain from his face. Miss Donovan, we're going to need you to come to the station to complete your formal statement. It'll take a couple hours, but it's necessary for the prosecution. I'll be there as long as you need me, Rachel confirmed. We're all coming, Hawk stated, not as an offer, but as a fact. Rachel doesn't go anywhere alone tonight. Whatever she needs, we're there. Torres looked at the 6 SEALs standing in formation around Rachel, their posture making it clear that they weren't asking permission, and nodded. Fair enough. You can follow the transport to the station. As the police began the process of transporting the suspects, Rachel found herself standing with her team in the rain, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade and leaving exhaustion in its wake. The last few hours felt surreal,
like something from a training scenario rather than a real event that had almost turned into a nightmare. "Are you okay?" Jenna asked, quietly, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Rachel thought about the question. Was she okay? She'd been assaulted, threatened, nearly kidnapped by men who'd done this to at least 7 other women. She'd activated an emergency signal and watched her former teammates drop everything to come to her aid. She'd stood her ground against 4 predators and lived to see them face justice. "I'm okay," Rachel said, and meant it. "Thanks to all of you, I'm okay." The bartender from Murphy's emerged from the bar, wrapped in a jacket against the rain. She approached Rachel hesitantly. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I called the police as soon as things got bad, but they—" "You did exactly right," Rachel interrupted gently. "You called for help, you documented what you could, and you didn't put yourself at risk. That's all anyone could ask." The bartender's eyes welled with tears. "Those men have been coming in for months. I always felt like something was wrong about them, but I should have—" "You're not responsible for their actions," Hawk said firmly. "They made their choices. You did what you could with the information you had." As the last patrol car pulled away with its cargo of handcuffed suspects, Rachel looked at her team. The 6 people who'd driven at dangerous speeds through rain and traffic to respond to her emergency. The 6 people who'd surrounded her with protection and support without a moment's hesitation. The 6 people who proved that leaving active duty didn't mean leaving family behind. "Next round's on me," Rachel said, breaking the heavy mood. "Once we're done with the police station, I'm buying." Zane grinned. "You just survived a kidnapping attempt. I think we can cover your drinks tonight." "Not a chance," Rachel replied. "I'm celebrating and you're all helping me do it." The Tacoma Police Department's main station was busier than Rachel expected for a rainy Thursday night. Officers moved through corridors with purpose, phones rang constantly, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with the institutional scent of government buildings everywhere. Rachel sat in an interview room with Detective Chen, going through her statement line by line, while the 6 SEALs waited in the lobby, their presence causing more than a few curious glances from officers passing through. "I need you to be as specific as possible about the physical contact," Chen explained, her pen poised over her notepad, even though she was also recording the conversation. "Where exactly did each man touch you? How much force was used? What words were said during the assault?" Rachel walked through it methodically, using the same kind of precise language she'd used in countless mission debriefs. She described Trent's grip on her shoulders, the bruising pressure of his fingers, the lean man's attempt to grab her arm, Dominic's hand reaching for her hair, the coordinated movement toward the van. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence built the case. "You mentioned that you believe this was coordinated in advance," Chen said. "What made you think that?" "Multiple indicators," Rachel replied. The 4th man, Dominic, was already in position when the other 3 approached. He came from the back of the bar, where he'd been waiting, suggesting they'd communicated beforehand about timing. The van was idling outside with a 5th person behind the wheel, engine running, positioned for quick departure. They knew the security camera was broken, and their movements showed practice. They'd worked together before. Chen nodded, making notes. Garrett's statement confirms most of that. He's claiming he was coerced into participating by Trent, but his story has inconsistencies we're exploring. 3 hours into the interview process, Chen received a call that made her expression shift to something resembling satisfaction. She listened for several minutes, asked a few clarifying questions, then ended the call and turned to Rachel with significant news. "We got the warrant for Trent Hollis's phone. Digital forensics found video files dating back 14 months. He'd been recording their attacks, keeping them as trophies." Rachel felt cold fury settle in her chest. "How many videos?" 11 separate incidents. We're working to identify the victims now, but preliminary review suggests at least 8 different women. Chen's voice was carefully controlled, but Rachel could hear the anger beneath. The videos show coordinated assaults, women being followed, threatened, and in 3 cases, forced into the van and transported to unknown locations. Jesus Christ, Rachel said quietly. 11 incidents. 8 more victims beyond the 7 Garrett mentioned. At minimum, Chen clarified. These are just the attacks Trent chose to record. There could be others he didn't film. We're also analyzing the phone's location data, which will help us establish patterns and potentially identify additional crime scenes. A knock on the interview room door interrupted them. Sergeant Torres entered with a folder tucked under his arm. Detective, thought you'd want to know? We just got a hit on CODIS. DNA recovered from the van matches an unsolved assault case from 8 months ago. Victim reported being drugged at a bar and waking up disoriented near the waterfront with injuries consistent with assault. She couldn't identify her attackers, but now we have physical evidence linking Hollis and his crew to that case. Rachel remembered Chen mentioning that one victim had declined to pursue charges. This must have been another case entirely. Someone who'd tried to get justice, but hadn't had enough evidence until now. Are we able to contact this victim? Let her know we have suspects in custody? Torres nodded. Victim Services is already reaching out. This is going to be difficult for her, reopening trauma she's been trying to process, but at least now she'll have answers and justice. Over the next hour, Rachel completed her formal statement, signed the necessary documentation, and received information about the prosecution timeline. Chen explained that given the volume of evidence, video recordings, DNA matches, witness testimony from Rachel and the SEAL team, Garrett's confession, and the physical evidence from the van, the district attorney was confident about securing convictions on multiple felony charges.
What kind of sentences are we looking at? Rachel asked. For Trent Hollis as the primary organizer, probably 25 years minimum, possibly more depending on how many charges we can prove. The others will face shorter sentences if they cooperate, but we're talking significant prison time for all of them. Dominic and Levi are looking at 15 to 20 years each. Garrett might get 10 to 15 if his cooperation is substantial. Marcus, the driver, is claiming ignorance, but his phone records show communication with the others that contradicts his story, so he's probably looking at 8 to 12 years. Rachel nodded slowly. And the victims? What kind of support services are available? We have victim advocates who will reach out to each person we can identify, Chen explained. Counseling services, legal support if they want to participate in the prosecution, compensation programs, everything we can provide. Some may choose not to engage with the process, which is their right, but at least they'll know the men who hurt them are facing consequences. When Rachel finally emerged from the interview room, she found her team exactly where she'd left them, spread across the lobby's chairs like a defensive perimeter. Hawk was reading something on his tablet. Zane was half asleep with his arms crossed. Isaiah and Dalton were talking quietly about something work-related, and Jenna and Finn were playing some kind of game on their phones. All done? Hawk asked, standing immediately when he saw her. All done. They've got everything they need for prosecution. The 6 SEALs rose as one, gathering their belongings and forming up around Rachel in an unconscious protective formation that probably looked excessive to anyone watching but felt exactly right to her. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and reflective under the streetlights. The air was cold and clean, washing away the institutional smell of the police station. Rachel took a deep breath and felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. So, Jenna said, breaking the contemplative silence, about those drinks you promised. Rachel laughed, surprised that she could still after the night she'd had. There's a place near the base that stays open late. Good beer, decent food, and they've never tried to kidnap anyone, as far as I know. High standards, Finn said dryly. I like it. They loaded into the 3 SUVs, Rachel riding with Hawk in the lead vehicle. As they pulled away from the police station and headed back toward Joint Base Lewis and McCord, Rachel watched the city lights blur past and thought about everything that had happened. She'd gone to Murphy's Bar to help a fellow veteran navigate the complex bureaucracy of military benefits. Instead, she'd encountered 4 predators who'd been terrorizing women for over a year. She'd been assaulted, threatened, nearly kidnapped. And through it all, she'd stayed calm, trusted her training, and relied on the team she knew would come when she called. You did good tonight, Hawk said quietly, not taking his eyes off the road. Kept your head, bought time, made the call. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. I had good training, Rachel replied. You had good instincts, Hawk corrected. Training gives you tools. Instincts tell you when to use them. You've always had both. Rachel smiled in the darkness of the vehicle. Thanks for coming. I know you all had plans. Our plan was always to be there when you needed us, Hawk said simply. That hasn't changed just because you're not active duty anymore. You're still one of us, Rachel. You always will be. And sitting in that SUV, surrounded by the people who dropped everything to respond to her emergency, Rachel knew he was absolutely right. She might have left the Navy, but she'd never left her team. And they'd never leave her.
3 months later, Rachel sat in the courtroom's public gallery, watching as the judge delivered sentencing for Trent Hollis and his co-conspirators. The trial had been swift by judicial standards, aided by overwhelming evidence that left little room for the defense to maneuver. Video recordings, DNA evidence, victim testimony, and the statements from 6 Navy SEALs had built a case so comprehensive that even the most aggressive defense attorneys couldn't dismantle it. Trent stood before the judge, his earlier arrogance completely absent. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his crimes and the certainty of their consequences. The judge's voice was stern as she outlined the charges: multiple counts of assault, attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, and possession of evidence of sexual assault. "Mr. Hollis, you and your accomplices operated as predators," the judge stated, her words carrying through the courtroom with absolute authority. "You systematically targeted vulnerable women, planned your attacks with calculated precision, and documented your crimes as trophies. The harm you've caused extends beyond your direct victims to every woman who now feels less safe in her own community." The sentence came down hard: 32 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 15 years. Dominic received 23 years, Levi got 20 years, even Garrett, despite his cooperation, received 12 years for his role in multiple assaults. Marcus, the driver, got 10 years after his claim of ignorance fell apart under the evidence of his active participation. Rachel watched as each man was led away in handcuffs, their futures reduced to decades behind bars. She felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but she felt profound relief that they could never hurt anyone again. More importantly, she felt hope for the 11 women who'd been their victims, women who could now begin processing their trauma, knowing that justice had been served. Outside the courthouse, Rachel met with several of the victims who'd chosen to attend the sentencing. Some had testified during the trial, speaking publicly about their experiences with courage that Rachel deeply admired. Others had chosen to remain anonymous, processing their healing privately. All of them expressed gratitude that someone had finally stopped these men. One woman, Melissa Torres, approached Rachel with tears in her eyes. She'd been the victim from 8 months ago whose DNA had been matched to evidence in the van. "I thought I'd never get justice," Melissa said, her voice shaking. "I reported what happened, I did everything right, but there wasn't enough evidence. I blamed myself for going to that bar, for drinking, for not fighting back harder. I carried that guilt every day." Rachel took Melissa's hands in hers. "None of this was your fault. You survived something terrible, and you were brave enough to report it. That report was part of what helped build the case against them. You contributed to stopping them." "But you're the one who actually stopped them," Melissa replied. "If you hadn't been there that night, if you hadn't had backup, they'd still be out there." Rachel shook her head. "I had advantages you didn't have. Military training, a team I could call, but you had courage, and you fought for justice even when the system failed you the first time. That matters just as much." The conversation with Melissa stayed with Rachel as she drove back to Seattle later that afternoon. She thought about how many women had been victimized before someone with the right resources happened to cross paths with these predators. She thought about the broken security camera at Murphy's bar that had given these men confidence to operate. She thought about all the systemic failures that had allowed them to continue for so long. But she also thought about the system working when it mattered most. The bartender calling police, Detective Chen's thorough investigation, the forensics team finding crucial evidence, the prosecutor building an airtight case, and her team, 6 Navy SEALs who'd responded to an emergency signal without hesitation and provided the support that made everything else possible. Rachel's phone buzzed with a message from the veteran support group she worked with. Tim Breslin, the veteran who'd canceled their meeting the night of the attack, was asking to reschedule. She smiled and typed back a confirmation for the following week. Life continued, work continued, and her mission to help fellow veterans navigate civilian life remained as important as it had always been. That evening, Rachel met her SEAL team at the same bar near the base they'd visited the night of the attack. It had become their regular spot over the past 3 months, a place where they could decompress and maintain the bonds that had been forged in far more dangerous circumstances than a Tacoma dive bar.
To Rachel, Hawk said, raising his beer in a toast, for keeping her head in a bad situation and trusting the team to have her back. To the team, Rachel countered, raising her own glass, for proving that leaving active duty doesn't mean leaving family behind. They drank, and the conversation shifted to other topics: upcoming training exercises, mutual friends still in service, plans for the coming months. The attack at Murphy's bar became just another story in the collection of experiences they'd shared, significant but not defining. Jenna leaned over during a lull in conversation. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't sent that signal, if you'd tried to handle it alone? Rachel considered the question honestly. I could have fought them, probably would have gotten away, but people would have been hurt, maybe seriously, and those men might have still been free to target someone else. The outcome we got, with everyone safe and justice served, that only happened because I wasn't alone. That's the lesson, isn't it? We're trained to be capable individually, but we're most effective as a team. It doesn't matter if it's a combat zone or a bar parking lot. Having people you trust makes all the difference. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed easily among old friends, Rachel reflected on how her life had evolved since leaving active service. She'd worried that transition would mean losing the sense of purpose and camaraderie that had defined her military career. Instead, she'd discovered that those things could exist outside the formal structure of service. She helped veterans navigate bureaucracy and find their footing in civilian life. She maintained connections with the people who'd served alongside her. She carried forward the values and skills that had been developed through years of training and operations. And when crisis struck, she had a team she could call on without hesitation. The attack at Murphy's bar had been terrifying and traumatic, but it had also reinforced something Rachel already knew. She was part of something larger than herself, a network of trust and mutual support that transcended active duty status or official assignments. A family bound by shared experience and unwavering commitment to each other's welfare. You know what the best part of tonight is? Zane said, breaking into Rachel's thoughts. What's that? We're just sitting here having drinks. No emergency, no crisis, no threat. Just friends spending time together because we want to. Not because someone needs rescue. He grinned. Though, don't get me wrong, we'd do the rescue thing again in a heartbeat. Rachel laughed. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Once was enough excitement for a while. Agreed, Hawk said, raising his glass again. To boring nights with good friends. To boring nights, they echoed, clinking glasses. As Rachel looked around the table at the 6 people who'd dropped everything to come to her aid, who'd surrounded her with protection and support, who'd proven that leaving the military didn't mean leaving brotherhood behind, she felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace. The world could be dangerous. Evil existed, sometimes organized and predatory, but so did good. So did loyalty and courage and the willingness to stand up for others when they needed help. Rachel had seen both sides throughout her life, in combat zones and civilian streets, and she'd chosen which side she wanted to represent. She'd continue her work helping veterans, she'd maintain her skills and training, she'd stay connected to her team, and if another emergency arose, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else, with competence, courage, and the confidence that came from knowing she wasn't alone. That was the real lesson from the night at Murphy's bar. Not that 4 men had underestimated her capabilities, though they certainly had. Not that justice had been served, though it certainly was. The real lesson was simpler and more profound. When you build genuine relationships based on mutual trust and respect, you're never truly outnumbered. Rachel had faced 4 attackers that night, but she called over her team of 6 Navy SEALs, and together they turned a potential tragedy into a story of triumph and justice. That's what family did for each other. That's what teams were for. And Rachel Donovan knew she'd always have her team no matter where life took her next.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.